Travis, you know, I don't see any of this on the map. I have this feeling this might be Uncharted. I apologize for the dad humor, but I have to practice because I do have a 9-month-old at home. And in all seriousness, the Subaru Uncharted really is uncharted territory for Subaru because this is the first time they have made an SUV without standard all-wheel drive. And actually, it's the first time in quite some time we've had any Subaru other than a BRZ without all-wheel drive. And even more interestingly, first time in a really long time, we've had a front-wheel drive Subaru. So lots of uncharted territory for this model, but it's also the smallest member of Subaru's growing electric vehicle family. And that's why it is also, yet again, uncharted. Right, Travis?
Yeah, exactly. It's the coupified crossover that is somewhat sized like a Crosstrek, but actually more capable, even though it's also a little bit more stylish.
Yeah, you know what? I'm honestly, part of me surprised they didn't just call this the electric Crosstrek or an Electrek or something like that, because I think that could have been cool, although they might have gotten in trouble for the Electrek thing based on that website. But at any rate, let's talk about this. It's almost exactly the same size as that Crosstrek. And this is what makes this seem more sensible to me for Subaru, because like the Trailseeker, which is almost identical to the Outback in format and size, etc., this is really similar to the Crosstrek. It's only about an inch different in dimension, and we have actually more practical cargo area in the rear than we find in that Crosstrek model.
Which is strange because that Crosstrek is such a good hatchback. That's one of the things I love about it. This one, of course, has a rear hatch, but so much more slope included.
Yeah, and of course, this is the close relative of the Toyota CHR. We would be remiss if we did not say that. And as such, we have the two different handle situation going on here. I don't know what everybody thinks about that, but we have a regular door handle up front, and then behind we have a vertical door handle in the rear. I do appreciate the fact that that raises the door handle up and hides it in this big black section, which works in this color combo, I think. But as someone with kids at home now, that handle's a little on the high side for anybody that's short to get in the back.
But I don't think this is meant for families. This is going for a younger buyer, and if they do have children, they're very, very young children, so this might not be the vehicle they go to soccer in. This is one they go to preschool in.
I also love this whole liftback vibe. It's been a long time since we've had a sexy liftback in America. And I wouldn't say this is the sexiest liftback, but I think it's really good looking. We got the twin spoiler thing going on there, mini twin spoiler up top and down here. Subaru spelled out nice and big across the rear. Very flat, abrupt end to this, and a really, really horizontal window in the back. That's why we don't find a rear wiper. I think that's the one misstep, I think, is the lack of rear wiper. I'll let you twirl onto the side there so you can actually see the lights. I'll go ahead and turn on the turn signal so you can see what they look like. Because unlike many Subarus out there, we do find full LED light modules in this car. Turn signal's down really low in the rear bumper. Not quite clear how I feel about that, but I do like the rest of the rear bumper where we don't find as much black body cladding all around this as we find in some Subarus. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot. There's still the wheel arches, still the big section right there below the doors, but it doesn't give me that raccoon vibe up front that the first generation Solterra did.
The entire silhouette here is so much more sport oriented, and even though it does have some plastic cladding, it's more of an accent piece than a, hey, this is because you're going to scratch up this component. And especially when it comes to the wheels here, we have the top end trim. This is the GT. We haven't seen that much, well, different nomenclature in terms of Subaru. So having a sporty-ish version, it's got a bigger wheel here. It's much more fashion forward, and Subaru has been so pragmatic, so functional. This one says, what if we were also interesting when you pulled up to, I don't know, an event with the valet?
The GT nomenclature also strikes me as interesting because this doesn't have the same premium limited touring kind of thing that we find in most Subarus. Instead, it's tied maybe a little bit more with, I dare say it, WRX. When are we going to get a TS model?
See, I think this is prime for a TS model, although we'll talk about what's under the hood in a second. This is not the most powerful, but I don't know why it shouldn't be. And when it comes under the hood, like you said earlier, this is one of the few Subarus you'll find that's not all-wheel drive, and the only one right now that is front-wheel drive if you get it that way. That's one of the big differences between this and the CHR. CHR is only going to be all-wheel drive. You can find the same power plant under here, but 221 horsepower is where this will start, up to 338 when you go for that all-wheel drive layout.
And it's worth noting that you get all-wheel drive in the top two trims. Only the base version is going to be front-wheel drive. I think I'm actually okay with that because they're targeting a really low sticker price of just under $35,000, many asterisks because that's without the mandatory destination charge,
Yep.
which everybody has to pay. So, you know, more like $36,500 really.
Right, but there's no reason to not have a lower price option, and that's where I am curious where Toyota didn't go that direction and Subaru did.
Yeah.
Although it's worth noting Toyota didn't do it here in the US, they do have it in other markets.
Now on the charging front, pretty much the same as the rest of Subaru's EV lineup, in that we have a J3400 connector there behind door number 6, and we charge it basically the same rate. So AC charging at 11 kilowatts, DC charging at 150 kilowatts.
Yeah, the 150 kilowatts is on the low side. It's basically the new bare minimum. I don't mind it terribly for everyday use, and I think a lot of these are going to spend a lot of time around the city versus some of the other electrics that Subaru has to offer. But 150, like I said, that's the base level, and it does hold its charging curve pretty well. And if you saved a few dollars versus some of the competition, I'll tell you that's probably where some of those savings come from.
Now Subaru's made some bold claims on the range. This is best in class with range as long as you don't include the Chevy Equinox EV in the segment. This is theoretically more of a Nissan Leaf competitor, and size-wise and style-wise I definitely see it. But let's take a look in the cargo area because I think that comparing this against an Equinox EV might actually make sense because the cargo area is pretty accommodating for a discount EV in America.
Yeah, we've just kind of thrown our bags in here and that took up the space. We talked about it comparative to the Crosstrek, and it is more space than you find in that Crosstrek, although obviously a little bit more stretched out rather than vertical. But it's perfect for your everyday living. And of course, fold the seats down, you get a whole lot more of it.
Yeah, if we pull out our handy dandy tape measure to find out what's going on back here, we get about 37 inches of cargo area width. But because of the sloped rear end, oops, if I can thread this like tooth floss down in there, 34 inches of length. And of course, this very lift back or sport back style design. No roller style cargo cover. We do have the hard cargo cover there, which I find a little bit less convenient. But let's talk about the seating on the inside, because this is not that much smaller really in terms of its legroom figures than the Solterra. Again, think of it as the electric Crosstrek. That's the corollary that they're trying to go for here. Front seat comfort, definitely a little different than the Crosstrek. These seats are a little bit more Toyota than we find in that model. Front seat's pretty adjustable, two-way adjustable lumbar support there. Manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. If I were to now hop in the back seats, I noticed, again, finding that awkward door handle there, that the doors don't open quite as wide as the ones in the Crosstrek, but we get a little bit more usable legroom back here, and that's definitely important. So again, with the front seats adjusted for me, let me grab my tape measure, and we measure out at a broken tape measure now of 5 inches of room between the knees and the seat back. That's definitely critical for putting rear-facing child seats. It's going to be a little bit of a stretch in here. Headroom is also a bit of a stretch. I'll go back to the middle. Yeah, there's just not a whole lot of room going on in here, as you'd expect out of an entry level. But over on this side, I find a reasonable amount more. My hair's brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling, because if you come in close, you notice that we do get a pretty aggressive bucket shape to the outboard seating positions. Unlike the Crosstrek, we get a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself. I do find that handy. Fold down center armrest with cup holders right there, and the rear seats fold to expand the cargo area out to just about the same that we find in the Crosstrek. These seats are not quite flat, and they're about 3 inches higher up off the ground than the cargo area in the rear.
This is related obviously to the Trailseeker and that Solterra, but it's the back space where you really start to lose a lot of space versus those other two. And of course, headroom, as you mentioned, because this is the more stylish one. And I'm not going to give an excuse, but I do think if you have a family, you're going for a Solterra or that Trailseeker.
Yep.
This, again, younger professional.
Yep, and longer range, but we still have some of the niceties like heated outboard rear seats and those high power USB-C outlets there. Now let's check out the interior up front. As we breeze around this interior, keep in mind the MSRP on this model is right around $45,000, so the most expensive way you can get your Uncharted. We have the rear view camera right there, LED lights for the dome light setup, the extendable section on the sun visors rather than extending sun visors themselves, LED illumination there, and the same sort of power shade cover to the glass moonroof that we find in other models. It does not open, so if you want an opening window, you're going to have to look elsewhere, but if you want something with a power shade that actually blocks off that light, you might want to look here. Grab handles for all 4 seating positions, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, 2-way adjustable head restraints, and seats that, you guessed it, look a lot like the Solterra and of course the Trailseeker as well. We get a different pattern to the ventilated seat motif right there in the middle, but we still have the moderately aggressive bolstering on the sides and seat bottom cushion. I am surprised that on all the models I saw today, we do have kind of a little bit of bunching over here on the passenger seat. These are probably pre-production models, but you might want to check and make sure that the models you have properly fitting upholstery before you actually sign on that dotted line, because that is something I noticed in more than one vehicle that we were looking at today. Moving over to the front doors, same sort of materials going on as in the Trailseeker and the Solterra. So soft touch insert there in the light gray, hard plastics for the entire lower section of the door, kind of a rubbery plastic in this midsection trim right here, and then hard plastics in front of that. I appreciate the extra fun they had in this interior with the bronze strip running across the dashboard. I would have loved to have seen more bronze accents in here, actually. We have kind of a golf ball-like texture to the soft touch upper section of the dash. This has the same sort of rubbery texture going on the doors, and no glove compartment below that. That's something that we've seen in basically this entire vehicle family. In the middle of the dashboard, we have this absolutely huge LCD. It's just over 14 inches, and it is standard even in the base trim. It, of course, features smartphone integration, so if you're looking at something like an Equinox EV or that upcoming Chevy Bolt, but you want CarPlay or Android Auto, hey, this is a good option to look at instead. We, of course, have factory navigation as well, our typical car adjustments there. You can even see what the all-wheel drive is up to on that little screen there, and adjust other system settings, that little gear icon. The climate controls are always going to be occupying this lower section of the screen. For better or worse, the software is the same that we find in most Toyotas on sale in North America. It's pretty flat as far as the design goes, and it's not as visually exciting as some, but it's definitely been reliable and easy to use. I also appreciate the fact that, again, we get that smartphone integration that people are after. We get 2 big air vents right down there in the center console, and definitely a lot of features borrowed from the other electric models. Twin charging mats right there in the center console in this model. Same sort of rotary button shifter that we find in other vehicles, where you push this ring down and then toggle between drive and reverse. That makes multi-point turns a lot easier than the toggle shifters where park is all the way on one side or the other. We have a button for the 360-degree camera system there, drive modes, X mode, of course, right there. Big cup holders going on here in the center console, and the same 2-tiered storage area that we find in other models. The key, that's definitely very Toyota looking, although it does have that Subaru logo right there at the bottom. I think that's actually okay because it's a bit slimmer than some of Subaru's other keys. Below the center console, we find a storage area that's a little on the short side, so you'd have troubles fitting larger purses or other bigger bags in there. Up here we find the LCD instrument cluster, and it's really far away from the driver, which makes it seem smaller than it actually is. I am surprised it's not running the latest LCD instrument cluster software that we find from Toyota. I'll go ahead and close my door since apparently it's complaining about that. But you can see that we do get things like infotainment information, of course vehicle health, and our trip computer, etc. Now, one thing that I've noticed people get a little bit wrong now and then is that you're supposed to be looking at that LCD kind of as if it was halfway between a regular instrument cluster and a head-up display. So you're supposed to look at it over the top of the steering wheel, not between the spoke of the steering wheel, or the hub of the steering wheel rather, and the ring of the steering wheel. Now, speaking of the wheel, it is a squircle design, so flat bottom and flat top, that aids that whole vision process there. We get paddles on the back for regeneration, so you can adjust that throttle lift off regen, but there's no one pedal driving here. These buttons control that multifunction cluster. We also get a voice command button, volume up down, track forward backward, that's over there, along with the adaptive cruise control buttons. It's misty and we're on a winding mountain road, so clearly that means we need to floor the all-wheel drive electric vehicle, at least for a bit.
Yeah.
Because if you do, you will get 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds.
This is a quick little kitten, but not the quickest you'll find amongst the electric Subarus, and that one is a little bit disappointing, but it's not far off.
That's true. I am a little bit surprised that, especially with the GT nomenclature, that they didn't give this a bit more power. Instead, this is sort of the more rational one, I guess you'd say. But all of the electric Subarus are more exciting than when the whole party started with the first generation Solterra.
Yeah, no doubt. Then they have 4 different powertrains laid out. It is strange, though, that this one gets the front-wheel drive option, not what we're driving today. Obviously, that's going to be slower, but I appreciate that it's here because you can get a nice car without having to get more than maybe you want to pay for.
And it sort of makes sense. Even though all-wheel drive has been Subaru's thing for so long, offering a less expensive front-wheel drive model honestly makes sense for the brand. And in some of their vehicles, I think they should do it even in the gas models. Like, you know, a front-wheel drive Crosstrek would probably not be the worst thing on earth if it could become a little bit less expensive.
Yeah.
But back to this model. So 0 to 60, 4.7 seconds. As you can see, it is definitely wet and misty out there, so we have not been able to do a 60 to 0 stopping run.
No.
But I suspect it's probably going to be in over the 120-foot range because of the tire size we find on here and the curb weight. This is the close relative of the Solterra and the Trailseeker. So even though it's smaller in format, it shares very similar battery and very similar electric motors, etc. So the curb weight, it's not exactly far off.
Yeah, it should be within a couple 100 pounds. Obviously, there's a little less structure in the back, but not no structure.
Right.
And I appreciate, obviously, the space up front, too, is basically the same across the bunch. So
yeah, very similar.
The experience for us up front is great across the line.
And the interesting twist, of course, with that relationship is that the Trailseeker is really very light for the size of the vehicle, especially in its competitive category. But by the time you get down here to this model, yeah, it's more, I guess I'd say, average to possibly a little bit heavy, depending on exactly what you're comparing it against.
Yeah, a bit on the dense side, which is why that 229 horsepower is a little bit low. But the 338 we get here feels like a very good pairing.
Yeah, let's talk about the handling now, because this is also uncharted territory for Subaru in a little bit.
It is.
That this is certainly firmer than Solterra or Trailseeker. I'm kind of okay with it for who they're thinking is going to buy this, but personally, I would gravitate towards Solterra or Trailseeker, because this is a little on the firm side.
It really feels like the sport nomenclature, sport and GT, fit the suspension more than anything else going on here. And it's not harsh, I wouldn't call it that, but it's not plush and it's not excessively comfortable. But that means driving out here, this is probably the most fun version to drive on a back winding road, even if it's not the most powerful. And actually, we appreciate probably that we're getting a little bit smaller form factor, because there's some serious crosswind happening here.
There is. And the one thing I like about the suspension is that even though it's firm, it's not bouncy. And in that first generation Model Y, the WRX-E, you had that firmness, but you also had this odd bounce because of the weight and the suspension geometry and just the amount of travel that it had. And this, with extra ground clearance, they were able to give it a little bit more suspension motion, it feels like. So over the bigger whoops and dives, it doesn't feel like the suspension is really bottoming out or it's bouncing on those lower bounce stops, etc. So it feels more sorted than some of those earlier EVs.
And even though we don't have things like an adaptive suspension, I will say one thing that you have in the Subaru model that you don't have in the Toyota is different drive modes. So if you want the all-wheel drive option, but maybe it's more power than you're looking for, you can dial that in with a normal or an eco mode, or you can turn it up for sport. So you can change your driving experience just a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever use them, to be perfectly honest, because of course your 0 to 60 time is going to be identical in all of them. You're going to get the same amount of power under full throttle. The X mode is interesting, since we have the dual X mode here, just like we find in the rest of the lineup. So in terms of raw all-wheel drive off-road capability, this is honestly pretty similar to the others. Actually, probably similar even to the Trailseeker, because we have shorter dimensions here than we find in that bigger Subaru model.
It is another thing missing over in the Toyota, right? So the Toyota, the BZ Woodland gets an X mode, but not the smaller one. So it's strange a bit that the most city-oriented, and I do feel like that's where this is going to be at home, or feel most at home, is also totally capable in the off-road conditions.
Now, as far as preliminary scores go, I think on the handling front, I'm going to give this a B, because we don't find tires that are as wide, we don't have a center of gravity that is as low and curb weight as low as some of the competition, but I think they did a reasonable job with it. Of course, we also find that front-wheel drive model, which is not going to be as exciting as the rear-wheel drive competition. Subaru has instead generally gone for more balanced power output front axle to rear axle in their all-wheel drive electric vehicles. But they have not gone as aggressive as far as shifting power to the rear for driving dynamics as some.
No, and that does feel like a small miss. Actually, within this vehicle, they found a middle ground. And I think there's room to go more off-road, and I think there's room to go more a little bit street-oriented. And that would be where swap those motors around, put the more powerful one in the back, even if it's not more power, changes the driving dynamics, give us a little bit less lift in the suspension, or give us an off-road tire option or an all-terrain tire, and see how far we can take it.
Yeah, on the other hand, this is certainly more fun to drive than a Crosstrek. So it depends on exactly what you're going to cross shop this against. On the ride quality front, the Crosstrek is definitely more comfortable. I would say the ride quality, though, is better than Mustang Mach-E, generally speaking. I even think it's actually a little better than some versions of the current Model Y, the post-refresh Model Y. I think as far as the EV competition goes, this is not as comfortable as Blazer or Equinox, or something like, of course, Subaru's own Trailseeker, but I think they found a decent middle road between trying to create a sporty-er Subaru, not exactly a sports Subaru, although I kind of wonder, what would this be like as a Subaru WRE? Well, you know, transplant the 375 horsepower engines in here, or borrow the even more powerful ones from Lexus and jam them under this body, maybe lower it down a bit, give it that WRE name.
Needs a big spoiler.
Needs a big spoiler. But the form factor works, I think, and why WRE rather than WRX, so you don't upset the WRX fans?
Yeah. This is a vehicle that I think Subaru needed if they're going to expand their lineup. As much as we love the Trailseeker and the fact that it's the electric Outback, this is something that adds to what wasn't there. It brings people in. I think it brings people into Subaru who may not have been looking at one previously.
Now, unfortunately, due to the wet weather, we have not been able to get cabin noise measurements because it just wouldn't be realistic to give you those. You're gonna have to wait until we can get this at home. Expect this to be probably average for the electric competition based on what we've seen in the CHR and the other models that we've been driving. Fuel efficiency, though, that is definitely an area where Subaru and Toyota both, in their EV models, have really come a long way in a really short time.
Yeah, not only is this going to be really efficient when it comes to the front-wheel drive model, but more impressively, I think, is the all-wheel drive, where we're looking at efficiency that is greater than a lot of the competition while not being less powerful anymore, because that was what the first generation of this Solterra power plant was underpowered and still not terribly efficient. This feels like huge steps in both directions. So if anything, it's sort of ladder jumping from other competition where it was not up to spec, and now it absolutely is.
I was definitely surprised that when they refreshed the Solterra, that they spent so much time and engineering effort on redesigning the electric components to improve efficiency, and that just rains down on this model as well, since it's sharing so much with that Solterra. The range, though, that is still an area where some people may be a bit divided, because I know that there are a decent number of EV shoppers out there that are thinking, you know, why can't I have more than 300 miles of range? And you're definitely not going to get that in this model. I suppose the real question, of course, is, do the people interested in an Uncharted actually want or need more than whatever range that you get out of this?
And my argument would be that they don't. They don't need, but probably want. And it's not just the number, but it's what you can expect the number. It's an issue we go back to. If this says it's rated for 280 miles, that does not mean a 280 mile road trip without stopping. That means probably 2 stops on a 280 mile road trip, and you'll get home with some power left, but you'll need a charge overnight. And this charging isn't terribly quick, but your everyday around town, no problem whatsoever. And if you're traveling amongst most states and you got to go halfway through one and come back, you should be okay with a quick stop.
I think that's more of it for me. Is I would be fine with the range. I would actually be fine with even less if it charged faster. So you could do that 5-minute stop, gain reasonable range. That is the trouble that I think we still find, not just in this, but in most of the mainstream electric vehicle competition, is that the 5 to 10 minute stop is not going to give you enough range to complete some of those road trips. For me, for instance, going from the San Francisco Bay Area down to the Los Angeles area in California, it would be more than a 5 or 10 minute stop to reclaim the range to get me down to the destination down there in Southern California or Northern California, vice versa, with just one charging stop. That one charging stop is going to have to be on the longer side. But we are starting to see change there, just not in this segment. Something like that new Volvo EX60, that might actually be the kind of technology that hopefully is not too far away, even for a mainstream model like this. The entry-level EV segment may be uncharted territory for Subaru, but other manufacturers have definitely done a lot of charting and mapping here. We have a lot of competitors in the US, including the upcoming Chevy Bolt and theoretically the really discount Nissan Leaf, which I'm super curious as to whether it's actually going to come and whether it's going to be as inexpensive as Nissan says. But also importantly, something like the Chevy Equinox is a direct competitor to this, because even though it's technically in a size category above, the discounts are going to put it right in the same price price territory as this. So let's talk about that price territory. When this goes on sale in the spring, let me reference my notes here so I make sure it's right. $36,445 gets you the premium front-wheel drive model. It's the only way to get front-wheel drive, and that just over 220 horsepower. If you want the sport all-wheel drive trim, $41,425. This model started at $45,445, and as equipped here, about $46,000 all in with the optional paint for the top-end GT trim. I think that pricing layout makes a lot of sense, but if I'm honest, I would have preferred if Subaru had gone even more aggressive on the discount options, because you will get into a Nissan Leaf unquestionably less expensive than this, possibly even an Equinox EV for less than this. And when it comes to range, Equinox EV is the one to look at because it will get you over 300 miles of range in both front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive formats. This is going to be 300 plus miles of range only in the base front-wheel drive trim. The others are going to be a little bit under 290 miles of range. Still pretty healthy, but given the limitations of the charging, which is incidentally about the same speed as the Equinox, likely pretty similar to the upcoming Bolt as well, I would have preferred just a bit more range or a lower price tag. I think both of those would have suited the Uncharted pretty nicely, because this is right on the toes of the Solterra, which is bigger and a bit more practical. And actually even the Trailseeker as well can be had for the same $46,000 price range as this particular model here. So let me know, are you interested in the Uncharted? Do you think they should have gone in an even more performance direction? For instance, should this have had the same motors as the Trailseeker? Because this is a little bit slower 0 to 60. I kind of wish, especially for the GT badging, that they had given this the same motor setup that we find in the Trailseeker, because that would have made this obviously the fastest electric option in the Subaru lineup, and it just would have worked with the GT branding, at least for me, a little bit better. But let me know what you all think of all of that down there in the comment section, and does this work better for you as a Subaru Uncharted, or does it work better for you as a Toyota CHR? While the Trailseeker, the other new Subaru EV for this model year, really makes a lot of sense as a Subaru for me, I think this one might make a little bit more sense as a Toyota. I like the look. I appreciate the fact that Subaru is bringing their customer base, which really does seem interested in EVs, a more affordable option. Intriguingly, Subaru is really going into this seeming headwind of electrification with more models than ever before, and also hopefully an upcoming 3-row EV, because Subaru shoppers still care about the environment and they want alternative powered vehicles, hybrids, which they have now growing across the lineup, and full EV options. Subaru is one of those brands where the customer is speaking, and the customer is definitely speaking EV for the moment. Let us know about that down there, and I'll see all of you later. Hopefully you're staying nice and warm and dry. 2-1. So Travis, we're on a charted road, but are you ready to drive on the road less traveled?
Let's find out. This is a quick little, ooh. Wah, wah, wah.